Nastia, a gray-haired old Russian lady around 90 years of age, is sitting in a wheelchair, and her caretaker is pushing it to the living room of her well-furnished house. A news reporter is conducting her interview. Nastia narrates about her horrible experience on the barge 752, which sank in 1941 while it was heading to Novaya Ladoga, as Leningrad was under attack by Germany. She tells about Kostya Gorlov, an artillery cadet, who was her boyfriend and the reason for her presence on the barge. She adds that she did have a photograph with him, but during the airstrike, the bombs fell on their house and destroyed everything, except one thing, Kostya's watch. She asks her caretaker to take her to the writing table. The reporters and the cameraman follow her. She takes out the watch from a case, claiming that the watch is 80 years old but has never needed a repair. Then she passionately puts it near her ear and smiles to hear it ticking, like in 1941 when it adorned Kostya's wrist. She slowly utters that she remembers all those days as if they happened yesterday. She plunges into her past life, when she was an 18-year-old girl. In 1941, Kostya, a 20-year-old boy wearing his artillery cadet uniform, is riding his bicycle toward his girlfriend Nastia's home, in a small town in Leningrad. He looks at his watch and pedals fast while shouting at the pedestrians to make way. Meanwhile, Nastia is quickly packing up her stuff. Her mother, Maria, a newspaper editor, is constantly muttering. Maria is worried for Nastia, as she has traveled only to the summer garden all her life, and now she is moving to a new city while evacuating war-torn Leningrad. She adds that her father used to say that leaving St. Petersburg was like making an elephant breathe underwater. Nastia, who is quietly listening to Maria, suddenly hears Kostya whistling. She runs to the window, then waves at Kostya down in the street. Kostya asks her to come down. Nastia leaves the window, laughs, and spins in excitement. Maria walks over to the window and peeps out. After looking at Kostya, she gives a cold look to Nastia, expressing her ignorance that they are both going together. Then she requests that Nastia tells her if she is going to get married to Kostya. Nastia irritatedly refutes her assumptions. Maria warns her to be careful about having an intimate relationship with Kostya before marriage. After parking her stuff, Nastia approaches Maria to bid farewell. Maria beseeches her to take care of her, as she is her only daughter, and kisses her forehead. Nastia takes her luggage and leaves. Upon arriving downstairs, she hugs Kostya and hands him her suitcase. Then they both run towards the military wagon which is waiting for Kostya. When they jump on the back of the wagon, the sergeant commands the driver to start the wagon. Then he scolds Kostya for being an hour later than the given time and gives him 3 extra duties as a punishment. Kostya calmly asserts that he will comply with his order. Back at Nastia's apartment, the doorbell rings. Maria rushes to the door, thinking it to be Nastia on the other side, who must have forgotten something. But when she opens the door, she is astounded to see Sasha, her husband, who has been in prison for years on charges of treachery against Russia and being accused of being a German spy. He steps inside and greets her, then informs her that he will stay for 5 minutes, as he has been assigned amnesty. The ruling was made a year ago, but due to a mistake, somebody else was sent, and now he is going to assist the soldiers on the front line. Maria listens to him while lowering her head. Sasha inquires about Nastia. Maria tells him that Nastia just left 5 minutes before his arrival. She asks him if he has forgiven her, as she had to disown him for their daughter's sake after he was accused of being a traitor. Sasha nods with a smile, then turns to leave. Maria wraps a boiled potato in a cloth and puts it in one pocket of his coat. Then she puts some sugar cubes in the other pocket, so he can have them on the way. She also gives him the keys to the apartment, so he can get home when the army gives him some days off. He smiles and looks at her hovering around, then leaves after bidding her farewell. In the meantime, the German army chief and the generals are planning their next move to destroy Leningrad. One of the generals mentions that there are around 2 million people in the city. Another general reports that, by an airstrike, they have destroyed the biggest food depot in Leningrad, and if they continue to siege the city, there will be famine within a month. The first general adds that they have blocked the whole Russian fleet on Neva, but on Lake Ladoga, the Russians have some old and unserviceable barges, so as a last option, they will use them and evacuate their people through the water route on Lake Ladoga. The other general's fear is that they cannot block that route because the lake is too large. He adds that there is a lot of activity and crowds on the Leningrad coast, but they can bombard the barges, if the Russians dare to use barges. The army chief smiles to hear a foolproof plan. Meanwhile, on the Leningrad coast, Kostya Gorlov is playing volleyball with his combat sergeant, who wins after giving him a tough time. While putting his shirt back on, he chuckles that the sergeant has a weak rear-view vision. The sergeant pins him down and takes his watch, avowing that he will get it back after cleaning the bathrooms. He can't disrespect him just because he is the son of the first-rank Captain Gorlov. Kostya affirms that he will clean the restrooms. The sergeant leaves while muttering that he is against nepotism. Then he orders his artillery cadets to gather off the coast. On the coast, an investigation officer named Vadim Petrachik arrives with his driver to board the ship with his vehicle. In the army cabin at the Leningrad coast, the Russian army chief, the captain of the barge 752, the tugboat captain, and Captain Gorlov are discussing the shifting of people on the barge 752. Captain Gorlov presents his plan for evacuating 1,500 people, including the artillery cadets, the naval cadets, the vehicles, and the civilians. The tugboat captain is not happy with the risky plan. He opines that the barge can only bear 600 people, as they have tried to shift cattle before, and resultantly, they all drown due to the poor condition of the barge. The chief agrees with him, but Captain Gorlov insists on exporting 1,500 people, as there is no other way to save war-torn Leningrad than to export people to other cities. The army chief questions them about who will take the blame if the barge sinks. Captain Gorlov gives his name, stating that not only will he send his son on the barge, but he is ready to be shot down if the barge sinks. The tugboat captain is still afraid that the barge cannot handle a big wave. The barge captain states that there is no waves at the lake, it is completely calm there. The chief approves the plan and issues the order. After some time, the barge captain arrives at the Leningrad coast and announces that the naval cadets will be boarded first, followed by the artillery cadets, and the civilians will board at the end. But anyone can enter with the approval of the captain. The naval cadets start boarding the barge. After hearing the announcement, Kostya, who is away from the boarding platform with his comrades, requests his commander to give him some time, as he has something important to do. Then he rushes to Nastya to board her on the barge. When the barge captain sees Nastya entering, he stops her. Kostya exclaims that she is with him. The barge captain smiles and lets them go to the barge. While they are heading towards the hold of the barge, the investigation officer Petrachik sees them, squinting as if he is trying to recognize them. Suddenly, his face starts sparkling as he recognizes Nastya. He steps out of his car and runs behind them, after showing his card to the barge captain. Later, the tugboat captain approaches Captain Gorlov and apologizes for going against his plan earlier. Captain Gorlov shakes his hand and wishes him good luck, specifying that it all depends on him. The tugboat captain insists he sends his son to his tugboat, as it is safer than the barge. Captain Gorlov will not go against his words, and declares that his son will stay with others on the barge. Then he leaves after instructing the tugboat captain to reach the destination within the dark hours. On the barge, Kostya escorts Nastya to an inner cabin of the hold and tries to kiss her, but she steps back, explaining that he should wait until they marry. Kostya sighs and goes out, promising that he will be back soon. When Kostya goes out, Petrachik enters the hold and looks around to find her. Nastya hears the thudding sound approaching. She quickly locks the door and goes beside the window, so nobody can see her. When Petrachik arrives, he tries to open the door, but fails. Then he looks inside the window, but finds no one inside the cabin. Meanwhile, the German aircraft fire bombardments on the Leningrad coast to stop the boarding by dispersing people, but they fail in their plan. After hearing the bombardment, Petrachik comes out on the deck to save his car, which contains all of his documents. Later on, while Captain Gorlov is supervising the boarding, a military officer rides in on his horse. He hands over a written order to Captain Gorlov, which is for summoning the artillery cadets to the front line, as they are only left with 10 survivors, and they need to win back their shore. Captain Gorlov reads the order and summons Maxim Petrovich, the commander of the artillery cadets. When the assistant of Captain Gorlov approaches the commander and gives his message, Kostya arrives and rejoins the cadets. The commander gives the command to embark the artillery cadets on the barge and goes towards the cabin of Captain Gorlov. When he approaches him, Captain Gorlov orders him to stop the evacuation and take the artillery cadets to defend the Leningrad border. The commander returns and orders the sergeant to stop embarking. Kostya becomes restless to hear that they are not boarding the barge, but he follows the orders. Nastya, who hears the sergeant's announcement from the porthole, takes her suitcase and worriedly walks out of the hold. Outside the cabin, Captain Gorlov orders his assistant to find his son and take him to his office. The assistant nods his head and runs towards the artillery cadets. While the commander of artillery cadets is forming up his unit, the assistant arrives and requests that he send Kostya with him, as Captain Gorlov wants to meet him. The commander lets him go on the condition that he will return in 2 minutes. In the cabin of Captain Gorlov, he gives Kostya a uniform of naval cadets and insists that he board the barge. Kostya is unwilling to do so, as his unit is ready to go to the front lines to fight the enemy, and he cannot desert them. Captain Gorlov shows him the orders to cast off the barge, which include a condition that the captain will take the blame for risking the number of passengers on the barge, and he promised to send his son on the barge too. Kostya becomes speechless, as on one side is his unit, and on the other side is the promise of his father. He takes the uniform and goes to the washroom to change it. After some time, the commander of the artillery cadets orders them to start marching toward the front line. The cadets are marching ahead, and one of them shouts that Kostya is a deserter, as he did not return. The sergeant angrily proclaims that he will report him to the high office for not following the orders, and no amount of nepotism will save him. On the barge, after embarking with the naval cadets, the barge captain announces the boarding of civilians. The people rush towards the barge. Nastya, holding her suitcase, approaches the barge captain and seeks his help in getting her out of the barge. The barge captain, after recognizing her to be Kostya's acquaintance, takes her suitcase and instructs her to hold his shoulder. Then he heads towards the coast, crossing the crowd of people. While they have been on the platform, Kostya meets them while coming to the barge, wearing a naval cadet uniform. He takes the suitcase from the barge captain and holds Nastya's hand, expounding that they need to go to the barge. Nastya is appalled to see him in a different uniform. She inquires about the reason. Kostya hurriedly takes her to the barge, as the barge is about to sail after boarding 1,500 people. When they reach the deck, Kostya leaves her there, adding that he will explain later. Nastya angrily takes her suitcase from him, then accuses him of ditching his unit and running away from his duty. Then she rushes away, declaring not to look for her anymore, if he can't explain himself. Kostya screams in frustration. After some time, when Nastya is standing with a group of music schoolgirls, a cadet approaches her and takes her bag, stating that her bag has to go with the other bags of civilians. Then an investigator comes in front of her, questioning whether she recognizes him, as he investigated her father's case and visited her place twice. She coldly reveals that she remembers him. He asks her if she is alone on the barge. Nastya replies that she is with her boyfriend. On his inquiry, she lies and says that her boyfriend stepped out of the barge. He approaches her, and while biting his lips, he utters that if she is not settled anywhere, he can offer her his car to stay in. Suddenly, Kostya comes between them, softly holding Nastya's hand. He declares that Nastya is with him. She smiles and tells Kostya about Vadim Petrachik, saying that he is the NKVD investigator. Then she turns her face towards the investigator and introduces Kostya Gorlov as a cadet. Petrachik shakes hands with Kostya, exclaiming with a dim smile that they will travel together. He walks away a few steps, then turns back and asks Kostya about his senior officer. Kostya remains silent, as he doesn't know any officers among the naval cadets. Petrachik smiles meaningfully, then announces that he will find him on his own and leaves. Nastya looks into Kostya's eyes and coldly remarks that the man has figured out everything about him. Then she walks away again. At the German military base, the army chief orders his generals to destroy barge 752, and spare neither a boat nor a wooden log. At the Russian front line, the military general tells the soldiers and the cadets that they have to win back the shores of Leningrad from the Germans. He adds that they need a channel to survive, and as Russians, they must fight the enemy, no matter if they lose their lives or take the lives of the intruders. The soldiers and the cadets chant that they will fight till their last breath and save Leningrad. Sasha and some other men, who have been pardoned on the condition of helping the soldiers in the war, are also standing there and chanting with the soldiers. After some time, they start paddling to the frontline shore on the boats. When they reach the shore, the sergeant gives Kostya's watch to a cadet named Andrei, who who is limping towards the front line despite calluses all over his feet, as a promise that he will never abandon him. The enemy is on a good post, where they can destroy Russian soldiers without losing their men. The Russians are heading to the posts of the Germans, but 2/3 of the Russians are only crossing halfway. Some of them met the Creator, while the others are groaning and wounded. Andrei lost his life too. The sergeant takes out the watch from his pocket and takes an oath that he will tie it around Kostia's neck, as he abandoned them while the other cadets were losing their lives to fight the enemy. Sasha is helping the wounded soldiers and dragging them to a safe place. The sergeant successfully shoots down the German soldiers who were handling the machine guns. While their victory against the Germans is easier, the Russian general orders the sergeant to take the wounded soldiers to Novaya Ladoga. The sergeant instructs Sasha to help him take the wounded soldiers to the boats. When they are ready to go, the sergeant asks Sasha to join him on the boat, but Sasha declines, choosing to stay back and assist the general. Meanwhile, on the barge, Petricic is flirting with a music student named Pomerantseva, who boarded the barge with her classmates under their teacher. While he is convincing her to stay in his car, the teacher approaches and drags her away, with a warning that she will be thrown out of the school. The barge captain instructs everyone to leave the deck and go inside the hold. When everyone has gone inside, Petricic orders the commander of the cadets to assemble the cadets on the deck and announce their names on the list. Kostia is also standing with them. The list ends, and the naval cadets move inside the hold, but Kostia remains there. Petricic approaches him and then accuses him of chickening out of his unit, and he will face the consequences. Then Petricic ties Kostia to the deck with a railing. On the Leningrad coast, Captain Gorlov is briefing that he received a message from the tugboat captain that they will reach the destination by dawn, and as soon as they reach Novaya, another vessel will set sail. A soldier approaches the chief, generals, and Captain Gorlov in the cabin. He hands a meteorological report to the chief, saying that there will be a storm in the lake. The chief is happy with the idea, as the enemy cannot launch any airstrikes in bad weather. Captain Gorlov is perturbed, as the barge is full of breaches, as per the tugboat captain's report. When the night falls, the barge is hit by the storm, and the ceiling of the hold is leaking rainwater. While the barge is tossing over the big waves, Petricic's assistant escorts Pomerantseva to the car. The waves are hitting the deck, and Kostia is screaming, tied up while tossing around on the barge. When Petricic and the girl kiss, the teacher arrives in search of Pomerantseva. The teacher screams that she is expelling her from the school. When Pomerantseva rushes out of the car to approach her, a big wave surges over the deck and sweeps her to the edge. She holds onto the railing, screaming. Petricic stays in the car, unconcerned. Kostia shouts to untie him so he can save Pomerantseva, and the teacher walks over to him. When she unties him, he rushes to the railing and safely takes her back. Suddenly, Petricic comes out of his car and takes Pomerantseva and her teacher inside the car, to save them from the waves. Nastia, who stepped out of the hold after hearing that somebody is drowning, sees Kostia safe and turns back. Kostia runs behind her, calling her name. By that time, the port side has breached out, and the water has started filling inside the hold. The people start panicking, as the barge will sink in no time. The tugboat captain has been informed about the water in the hold. He tells his assistant to instruct them to pump out the water. He delivers his message to the barge through a signal lamp, and the barge captain takes 10 cadets, including Kostia, out of the hold to pump out water. But by this time the barge is getting heavier and heavier, so the tugboat captain instructs his assistant to contact the Leningrad coast and call for an SOS. After receiving the SOS call from the tugboat, Captain Gorlov orders his assistant to contact the vessels to send help. But despite trying, nobody agrees to take risks in the bad weather. Captain Gorlov lowers his head in grief. By dawn, the water fills up near the waists of the people and might have reached their heads if the cadets were not pumping it out. The music students start playing soft tones on the violin to calm down panicking people. Everyone is somber, but they stop running around. They are all just holding on to their loved ones. In the German military camp, the general orders 2 pilots for the airstrike, as the barge is only an hour away. The pilots head to their jets for the mission. On the Leningrad coast, Captain Gorlov sails towards the barge all alone. The coast chief warns him that the fuel is only for going. But he sets out to save his only son, whom he forced to travel on the barge. Meanwhile, the German jets arrive over the barge and start bombarding them, hitting many people inside the hold, including 5 cadets who were pumping out the water, as well as Pomerantseva inside Petricek's car. The teacher who is inside the car gets numb after seeing blood all over Pomerantseva's neck. When the jets fly away and turn back, Kostya runs inside the hold and asks for a gun. A man has 5 guns. Kostya takes one and gives the rest to the cadets. While he is heading out, Nastya approaches him and passionately kisses him. Then he comes out of the hold. He commands the cadets to load the guns and aim. When the jets reach the barge, he shouts to shoot. Before they can shoot, the shells fall on them. Kostya shoots at a jet that gets damaged, and as a result, they are forced to fly away. Kostya is breathing heavily and is wounded. But he keeps running around the deck to defend the barge from the attack. By this time, the water has reached the shoulders of the people, as the pumping has been paused. When the barge captain realizes that there is no way to save the barge from sinking, he instructs the cadets to take out the women and kids, and shift them to the tower room over the deck. When there is no space left in the tower room, they close the door of the hold, and Nastya stays inside the water-filled hole. When the tugboat captain sends a message that the barge is becoming heavier, this will cause trouble. The barge captain decides to throw out heavy items, including a piano that once belonged to Leo Tolstoy, and Petricek's car. When the cadets go to the car to drop it, Petricek stops them by pointing his pistol at them and accuses Kostya of being a traitor whose father gave them a defective barge 752. The cadets move to the piano to drop it. The old man who owns the piano helps them slide it down the barge to make space for people. After looking at the old man's sacrifice, Petricek calls the cadets to drop off his car too. After dropping off the heavy items, the naval cadets start throwing the suitcases. Many women and kids are in the tower room of the barge, while the others are struggling in the hold, along with some floating bodies. Kostya cautiously looks around, as if the enemy might return. The tugboat also struggles to drag the barge. Sometime later, a few miles away from the destination, the sergeant and his surviving cadets also reach the tugboat. He is appalled to see the devastated condition of the barge, but his wonder turns into pride when he sees his cadet Kostya holding a gun to defend the barge. Suddenly, the second German jet returns, after escorting the damaged jet back to the base, and starts bombarding them, then flies away. Some of the people on the deck jump in the water, including Petricek, while the rest meet the Lord. When the jet turns back again, the sergeant on the tugboat chants, "Go soldier," to motivate Kostya. Kostya aims and shoots at the jet. The bullet hits the neck of the pilot, the jet wavers over the barge, then crashes into the tower after colliding with the mast. The heavy mast falls in the middle of the barge and results in the barge splitting down the middle, which starts sinking. The people wail and try to hold on to floating suitcases and barrels. The tugboat captain orders the crew to cut the rope which is pulling the barge. Meanwhile, the artillery cadets use the boats to shift the surviving people to the tugboat. Kostya jumps in the hold and looks around for Nastya, shouting her name. He finds her at one end, holding a barrel. He swims to her and takes her out of the hold. By that time, the surviving people have been shifted to the tugboat. Kostya screams for help. The sergeant, who is looking around for him, shouts to turn the tugboat to Kostya. They turn the tugboat, and upon reaching them, the sergeant gives his hand and pulls up Nastya and Kostya. After coming up, Kostya is amazed to see the sergeant. He exclaims whether he came to return his watch. The sergeant smiles, takes out the watch from his pocket, and gives it to Kostya. Then he hugs him, patting his back. After some time, they reach the coast. When Kostya and Nastya step out of the tugboat at the end, they find Petricek waiting for them while standing by his car. Kostya chuckles and asks if the car is waiting for them. Petricek laughingly asserts that the car is waiting for him, and he is waiting for them, as he wanted to meet them before leaving. He turns to Nastya and asks her to take care of her boyfriend, as his neck always sticks out. Then he shakes hands with Kostya and leaves, after wishing him good luck for his future. When he sits in his car, Kostya goes to his window and wishes him good luck with a smile, then walks ahead, holding Nastya in his arms. When Captain Gorlov reaches the last position of the barge, he finds nothing except floating suitcases, and a dog holding onto a board. He saves the dog and cries, reckoning that he lost his son. Back in the present time, the old Nastya wipes her tears, then continues that her father Sasha was shot down on the front line of Nevsky Pyatatchok. Later, her mother, Maria, was found frozen in 1942. She sobs that on September 17, 1941, more than 1,200 people lost their lives in Barge 752, while the captain of the tugboat was awarded the Order of the Red Star for saving more than 200 people. She adds that the people do their part every day to save their solidarity in Leningrad, and it is no less than a war.